our final week of position previews. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, February 17th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Hope everybody enjoyed their Valentine's Day weekend, and I hope you listened to the Players We Love podcast because Scott killed it again. So if you haven't, go back and listen because that was awesome. Today on the show, SP Preview Part 2. We'll try and get through the top 40 in ADP, and then we will wrap up with sleepers, breakouts, and busts at the position. Let's get right back into it. We are using Fantasy Pros ADP, 4 different websites, not using ESPN because, again, their stuff is a little wonky right now. We're going in groups of 3 so we can keep things moving. 3 names going in the 50s. We have Jacob deGrom with an ADP of 51.8, Yoshinobu Yamamoto at 56.8, and Michael King at 58. These are SP 13 through 15, by the way. With deGrom, there are just so many questions. He's 36 years old and returning from his second Tommy John surgery. He hasn't reached 100 innings since 2019. Is he the same pitcher? Nobody knows. Yamamoto got the record-setting deal last offseason. He looked really good when he did pitch. He also suffered a strained rotator cuff and then triceps tightness, which is pretty scary. He returned late in the season, pitched in the postseason, actually had a very dominant start in the World Series up against the Yankees. And then Michael King, who got off to a rough start and then turned into one of the best pitchers in baseball from May on last season. He has 4 pitches, all look to be above average, but he did have a big innings jump from 104.2 all the way up to 185 2/3. Scott, you will get the first word here. Thoughts on this trio? Do you target any of them?
I target none of them deliberately. The one I have the best chance of drafting is King because he is at a point in ADP where he may last longer. Again, it has to be kind of a discount like I was talking about on the first show, but in a scenario where he lasts a little beyond ADP, he might last beyond the point where there are still stud hitters available. And so I might take King as my ace. I am buying into what he did last year. He was pretty awful in April, by the way, so the numbers look even better if you take those stats out. I think like most of the home runs he allowed on it for the season came in that 1 month, and he had walk problems too. So King's the one I'm most likely to take. deGrom I have 0 chance of taking. 0. I think he is the most overdrafted player this year, going in round 5 on average in a 12-team league. And I'm not sure I'd take him in round 10 if by some miracle he was still there. You say the biggest question is he still the same pitcher, 36, coming back from Tommy John surgery? I don't know that I want him to be. For this price, he's got to be better than the same pitcher because the pitcher before Tommy John surgery hadn't thrown even 100 innings in a year since 2019. And it corresponded to a 2-mile-per-hour increase in velocity for deGrom. He was winning Cy Young awards before that, but for some reason in 2020, bumped his velocity up 2 miles per hour. It stayed there since then, and it's been nothing but shoulder, forearm, and elbow troubles since then. I just don't think his body can hold up to that kind of velocity, and he's proven it over and over again. So it's not even like a Chris Sale situation when he was hurt for 4 years where, okay, maybe if those fluky things don't happen. I don't think it was fluky things with deGrom. I just don't think his body can hold up to that. And so that's why it's not even really a question of how good he is. I think he'll be good, but he's got to be good and healthy. And the healthy is the issue here as the 53rd player drafted on average. Yamamoto is not as extreme a version of that, but it's mostly volume are my questions for him. I think he's great, but he missed time with injury last year. Okay, maybe that was unusual. He wasn't hurt much in Japan, but only 7 of his 18 starts lasted 6 innings. So less than half lasted 6 innings. The Dodgers were really careful with his workload. And I think the way they've constructed their pitching staff this year, and as dominant as their team is, like sort of like I say for Roki Sasaki, they don't need him to throw a single pitch to make the playoffs. They don't need Yamamoto to throw a single pitch to make the playoffs. I think it's going to be all about preserving their best arms for the postseason. And so I think on a start-to-start basis, the fantasy production will be underwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
The thing with deGrom that I think the thought process is this. People will say the response to he needs to stay healthy to be worth this price. And people will point to 2021 when he was, I believe, the number 4 starter in fantasy in 92 innings, which is bonkers. The problem is that was 5 years ago now. And it was a Tommy John surgery and a bunch of injuries otherwise. And 33 to 37. And I don't care how good you are. I don't care if you're DeGrom. A 1.08 ERA is not something you can expect any pitcher to. Yeah. Even Mariano Rivera pitching twice or 3 times a week very rarely ever had a mark that low. It was a 1.08 ERA, a .554 whip with 146 strikeouts. Like, okay, yeah, if he does that again, he could be a top 5 pitcher in 92 innings, but he's not going to do that again. That's not a reasonable expectation. He came back the next year and was awesome and had a 3.08 ERA. He was amazing in 2020 and had a 2.38 ERA. So I think that's the thing that people are struggling with in their rankings of deGrom, is looking at that 2021 season and saying, he only has to pitch now. And that's not.
Yeah, I don't even know, like, to get 92 innings from a starting pitcher. Okay, if you plug in all the variables into the roto equation, maybe it spits him out as a top 5 pitcher. But, like,
well, we're talking roto too. That's
right. I think you're sacrificing so much in so many categories that it's going to require such an extreme build from you to compensate for what you're losing. Like, it's an issue I've always had with saying this player ranked blank in roto last year. So it's kind of like, well, how valuable he was kind of depends on what the rest of your team looked like.
Sure, but I think he was that valuable that year. Like, whatever, pick a replacement level player and add the rest of the season on, and that player was going to put up 250 strikeouts combined with Jacob deGrom with like a 250 ERA, probably. Just that, because of how utterly dominant he was. It's just that he's not going to be that dominant again. And if he is, then whatever, I guess I'll be wrong. But you're talking about, like, not a 99th percentile for Jacob deGrom in 2021. You're talking about a 99th percentile for every pitcher in Major League history. Like, that was an outlier. And since then, he's still been very good. But again, it's a 37-year-old, and his velocity was down last year. And you could look at it and say it was about 1.5 miles per hour down from where he was in 2023. It was 2 miles per hour down from 2021. And maybe it was him not throwing as hard.
Right. This would be the one case of a pitcher coming back from Tommy John surgery where if he's throwing couple miles per hour softer, it's probably a good thing.
Well, that's maybe if he's deciding to not throw as hard. If he has to give the same effort to throw 97 as he was throwing 99, that probably means that it's putting similar stress on his arm, and you're not getting as good of results. So
or he's just not healthy.
Yeah, or he's just not the same guy.
Yeah,
and so I think there are just a lot of assumptions baked into his price that are hard to justify, is the way I would put it. So I don't know. The good glob, as Scott likes to call it, I'm sort of struggling with it because I agree that 15 to 35 or whatever.
We're not into it yet, by the way. I have King ahead of that, and I have Valdez. We're almost into the good glob.
I have Michael King in that ahead of that range too, but I kind of maybe think that it should just be, for me, like 11 or 12 to 35, because I look at this range and everyone, I'm kind of like, I kind of want to rank him lower than that. But that's also true of the next guy down and the next guy down and the next, like, I just don't think there's that big of a difference between a lot of these guys. And
you eventually get to a point, at least I do, where it's like, I want to rank that guy higher.
Yeah.
Oh, but the guy ahead of him, I don't want to rank low. And it's everybody seems either too high or too low, depending on what half of the good glob you're looking at.
I almost want to just move Michael King down to like 75 in my overall rankings, and then make the next 40 picks pitchers or the next 30 play. Like, just because that's kind of how I feel, is that they're not interchangeable in terms of skill sets, obviously, or outcomes, but in terms of like the overall expectation that I have for them, like, this is an interesting group because you have King and Yamamoto, who are like less stuff guys and more command guys. And when Michael King locked in last year, his command was beautiful. It was so much fun to watch him pitch. It was just because the stuff is good, but not elite, certainly. What we saw at the early part of the season was if he's not fully locked in, things can unravel really quickly. And I think Yamamoto has both better stuff and better command than Michael King. It's just, I think the injury risks is a little higher and the workload. Mm-hmm. So I think it's unlikely. Yeah, I'm going to draft any of these three.
I don't really actively target any of them either. If I am going to take one, I think it would be Michael King as well. Just one thing to keep in mind, if you do draft him, you're probably going to get a slightly elevated whip because his walk rate is a little bit higher than we would like to see. For anybody watching on YouTube, make sure to sign up for the FBT newsletter if you haven't already. You could scan that QR code in the top right corner. That will take you right to the website, cbssports.com/newsletters. Click on the FBT logo, and it's easy as that. You'll get a newsletter delivered right to your email inbox every weekday, a couple times a week, something like that.
It's going to be pretty much every week until 5 days a week until about October now.
All right. And big thanks to everyone who's watching us on YouTube. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll get back into starting pitcher ADP right after this.
Yeah, we always find our way back home.
Welcome back in. Moving on with fantasy baseball today. Some starting pitcher ADP. Next up, we move into the 60s. We have Framber Valdez with an ADP of 62.3. Pablo Lopez at 66. Shota Imanaga at 67. That's SP 16 through 18 in ADP. Framber Valdez went on the IL with a sore elbow in April last season. He missed 18 days. He did have a bit of a rough first half and then exploded. He increased the curveball usage, and over his final 14 starts, a 2.08 ERA, a .96 whip, 10 K per nine. He's also a proven workhorse entering a contract year. Pablo Lopez got off to an awful start. He was much better in the second half, carried mostly by an awesome August. Strikeouts took a little bit of a step back. He might be prone to higher ratios because of a fastball that gets hit pretty hard. And then Shota Imanaga, first season with the Cubs, was an awesome one. He relies more on deception and control. He has this vertical approach, fastball, and a devastating splitter. He was quietly a workhorse too, 6+ innings in 20 of 29 starts. And the ERA estimators all say that he deserved a mid to high threes ERA. So kind of an interesting one to evaluate for this upcoming season. Chris, do you find yourself targeting any of these? Valdez, Lopez, and Imanaga?
I'm going to draft a lot of Framber Valdez and probably a decent amount of Pablo Lopez. Probably not very much Shota Imanaga. I'm leaning towards being out on Shota Imanaga, and I've kind of moved him down a lot in the past couple of days as I've gotten a little deeper into more specific research. He's my SP21, and I'm not sure. Like, he's going a little bit ahead of Bryce Miller. I'm not sure there's much of a difference between him and Bryce Miller. I'm not sure there's much of a difference between him and Bailey Ober. I'm not sure there's much of a difference between him and Joe Ryan. So I don't love the Shota Imanaga. It's just, for me, it comes down to how much of his success last year was that major league hitters just quite literally have never seen a pitcher like him. Like, most of these guys have just never seen a pitcher who throws from the arm angle that Shota Imanaga does, that throws, use a 5'10" lefty with a low arm slot. So there's just, you don't get many looks like that. There are basically no left-handed starting pitchers who rely as heavily on a splitter as Shota Imanaga does, which hitters tend to perform worse against pitchers the less they see them. And I just worry that he took the league by storm, benefited from that, still had the limitations that we thought he would. The volume was just okay. A lot of home runs, 27 home runs. I think only 6 of them came with more than one runner on base. And so it just feels like the ERA is likely to be inflated. And if it's 350 and he still has a really good whip and plays for a good team, you can see him still being a very valuable pitcher. It's probably more like number 20. And then like when you compare him to Pablo Lopez, especially, this is what the ADP says. And I can't argue with that because numbers is numbers, but Pablo Lopez feels like he's going way later than these guys in the drafts that we're actually doing. And he's also going to come with a slightly inflated ERA. That's been the case 3 straight years now for him, but
he's never had, he's only once had an ERA below 360, Pablo Lopez.
And so I think that's going to be an issue for him. I think the whip will be useful, but probably not great, but he's a stabilizer. He's a guy who, you're going to get the 185, 190 innings. You're going to get 200 strikeouts out of him. I think there's room for the strikeout rate to improve back to the 2023 rate. And so for me, it's just Pablo Lopez is a guy who, if he falls, I'm more likely to draft him. But Framber is, I think, clearly the guy I'm actively targeting of this group.
Because I was going to say, he's the one who's outside of the good glob for me. So he's kind of the last semi-ace, I feel like.
Because you get not just really good production. It's a 3.08 ERA since the 2021 season, I believe. But it's tons of volume, very few injuries. He did miss a little bit of time early last season, I believe, with a forearm injury. But came back and was as good as we've ever seen him in the second half when he increased that curveball usage. So
final 13 starts from Valdez had a 191 ERA, 0.89 whip, 10.3 K per 9 with him throwing about 10 percentage points higher with being 10 percentage points higher with the curveball usage.
Yeah. And so I don't expect him to be a 10 K per 9 guy, but he doesn't need to be because the quality of contact is consistently excellent and he limits home runs and everything. And he pitches deep into games. So Framber is a guy that I like pairing with another ace who gives me a higher strikeout upside. But I also think if you just take one, I think he's a perfectly fine one.
Let me go back to Imanaga just for a second. I'll make this point once. Chris has already referenced Bryce Miller and Bailey Ober. I think those 3, there are others, but I mainly focus on those 3. It's a really, really close profile.
Mm-hmm.
Bailey Ober had the 3.98 ERA last year. Shota Imanaga had the 2.91 ERA. But Bailey Ober had the higher strikeout rate, had the lower exit velocities, had the lower home run rate. I think that 1 run difference in ERA was mostly just happenstance. And that doesn't mean Imanaga is going to have a 3.98 ERA this year. That doesn't mean Ober is going to have a 2.91 ERA. But I think both of those extremes are within the range of outcomes for both. And so I'd rather just take the one going later, which is Ober.
Yeah. The only thing I was going to point out with Imanaga, and Chris, I hear your point about the league maybe figuring him out in year 2. He didn't use his sweeper and changeup much, but they performed really well in a very limited sample. So I just wonder if he didn't need them, like he was so good. He didn't break them out. Like maybe this year, if people start to figure out the fastball or the splitter, he says, all right, well, let me start to mix in the sweeper and this changeup a little bit more when I need to. I just wonder if that's a possibility.
It's possible. You know what it reminds me of? Nestor Cortez in 2022. Like just funky, weird, an arm angle that hitters just don't see very much of, an approach the hitters just don't see very much of. And Nestor Cortez has remained a pretty good pitcher, especially when healthy. He was quite good last year for the most part. It's just when it's a deception and command profile, I think the margin for error can be very small. And so a slight injury that he's pitching through, like we've seen with Nestor over the past couple of years, can kind of derail things. And that's the comp that I keep coming back to, where took the league by storm, maybe not totally sustainable though.
Yeah. And I agree with you guys completely on Framber Valdez. Hopefully we don't do too many actual drafts together, because I'm learning we all like a lot of the same players here.
This is what happens. We're starting to get the mind meld. You know, we need to take some podcasts off. Just like Scott, take a month off in November, then I'll take December off. Frank, you take January off. That way we're not all just bouncing the same guys off of each other.
Yeah. I mean, Framber Valdez, I don't want to mislead the audience. I'm not explicitly targeting him. It's like, it's not like, oh, I got to get Framber Valdez. It's sort of like what I said for Michael King. He is the last of the pre-Good Glob pitchers available, one of the last. And so there's a chance he'll still be there when I'm done looking for hitters.
No, I'm actively targeting him.
That's fine.
I really like Framber Valdez. I think if I could get Corbin Burns in the 4th round, if that doesn't happen, then I'm probably looking for Framber Valdez in the 5th round, and then just kind of building my pitching staff around one of those two. Let's move on down to next up. We get to Aaron Nola with an ADP of 74.5, Bryce Miller at 80.5, and Luis Castillo at 86. These are SP 19 through 21. And I think Nola's starting a graceful decline here. Strikeouts dropped, but I came away encouraged when I was digging in. He's still a workhorse, 180 plus innings, 4 years in a row. The curveball is still awesome. Velocity hasn't dropped. He rated very highly in Stuff Plus, and he pitches on a good team, the Phillies. Big breakout season from Bryce Miller. He finishes the SP7. He returned $21 of value. He added a knuckle curve on June 29th, and over his final 15 starts, it was a 1.94 ERA, 0.91 whip. Just beware of home road splits. They're pretty stark there for Bryce Miller. And his teammate, Luis Castillo, has also started to decline here. Strikeouts came down, big drop in swinging strike rate. Fastball velocity has dropped 1.5 miles per hour over the past 2 years. And he got crushed by lefties. He might need to bring that changeup back or figure something out to get lefties out. Looking into this trio here, I actually came away more discouraged looking at Luis Castillo than the other two pitchers. Scott, are you actively targeting any of these? Aaron Nola, Bryce Miller, Luis Castillo.
Okay. I'm trying to, I think I may be following along in the wrong place. Oh, you know what? Luis Castillo, for some reason, isn't visible here, right? In the, on the Fantasy Pros page. I think I've had trouble finding him for whatever reason. Anyway.
If you click on the average button on the top, then that'll put them in the right order.
Okay.
I don't know if I explained that correctly, but
yeah, I don't know. For some reason, there's a couple. Okay, I see what happened. Yeah, it's not important. Anyway, so these are all in the Good Glob, and like, I'm going to take several pitchers from that range of the draft, from that 15 to 50 range. It's really more like 15 to 47. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, it'll be lower than 47 even, because some pitchers will have gotten injured. But it's a big range is the point. And I'm going to need several from it. I think I said on yesterday's show or on the last pitching preview that I want 6 of my top 50. So I may not have a pitcher yet. I'm going to have to get a lot if that's the case. And so I say that just to say that even if I think these aren't necessarily the best values within that Good Glob, if I need a pitcher, I'll just take whoever my highest guy is. The whole idea of, wow, this range of pitchers, it's really hard for me to distinguish between them, is that I don't want to have to distinguish between them, because it's hard and because I don't think I'm going to be that close to accurate with it. So I'll just take whoever I happen to have as the highest. They do things that are different, of course. Aaron Nola, you mentioned, he's an ERA liability. I think he and Pablo Lopez are basically just the Spider-Man meme. And we've got to accept that they're going to probably give us an ERA above 350. Strikeout per inning, maybe a little more in Lopez's case, but a lot of innings, volume. They're volume plays, basically. And so that's different from Bryce Miller, who, if I don't have a pitcher at this point, I'm going to be extra conscious about my whip, and he's going to help with that. Like I said, Bryce Miller looks a lot like Bailey Ober to me. I think Ober's a better value, but maybe I could get both because I need a lot of pitchers at this point. I would say that I don't have a lot of experience drafting any of these three pitchers yet, but I think the draft could shake out in a way that I am taking one as my ace. And more likely it would be Nola or Castillo because they have that ace history. The thing about this good glob range, 50 to 50, particularly towards the top, there are a lot of pitchers that we've always regarded as aces in fantasy, and they mainly just got pushed out because there's so much depth now. Nola and Castillo are among them. Pablo Lopez is among them. Max Fried and Logan Webb are among them. I would say those five we generally regard as aces, but we're not this year because they've just gotten pushed out. So I'm okay taking one as my ace, but it's not. If I am taking one as my ace, I better have a pretty loaded offense at that point, because there are shortcomings for each of them. Nola's case, like I said, ERA. Castillo's case, I don't know. He does worry me a little more because it seemed like he struggled to stay healthy last year, and there was that decline in velocity, but he was still pretty darn effective. And I think with better health, we could see this stuff improve.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I'm actively targeting any of them. I think Bryce Miller, look, if you take like a Blake Snell or even Framber Valdez, his whip is going to be a little bit higher. I think that's a totally fine pitcher to pair with one of those. Aaron Nola in a points league, yeah, I think I could be down with that. I mean, he's still a workhorse. Yep. He went 6+ innings in 21 of 33 starts last year, and he's going to give you quality starts. He should get wins on a good team too. So, yeah, I would be okay with Aaron Nola of that group, especially in a points league. Next up, we get to Bailey Ober, ADP of 86.3, Max Fried at 86.8, and Logan Webb at 89. These are SP 22 through 24. And, you know, I kind of came away a little confused on Bailey Ober. I know that he is very similar to Imanaga and Bryce Miller. We just talked about that. I love the K to walk rate, the swinging strike rate. He became more of a workhorse type last year. He also introduced a cutter last season, and it just wasn't great. And his fastball got crushed. So I wonder if like the cutter might have affected his four-seam fastball, because it was a good pitch in years past. So that just kind of confused me a little bit about Bailey Ober. Max Fried, 31 years old, signed an 8-year deal with the Yankees this offseason. Really talented pitcher, but has had forearm strains 2 years in a row. He also just felt a little bit off last year. The walks were up. The swinging strike rate was down to 10.2%. And then Logan Webb, who is a premier workhorse. You know you're getting a ton of innings. He took a step back from 2023. I think looking at his career now, we could say 2023 was a pretty clear outlier for Logan Webb. His best pitch, the changeup, was off all of last season. He quietly introduced a new cutter in September, and it produced some really good results. There were some quotes like him, "I'm pretty excited. I found this new grip. I plan to use it next season as well." So that kind of intrigued me for Logan Webb. Chris, any interest in this group? Bailey Ober, Max Fried, Logan Webb.
I think because so many of my drafts are going to be with Scott, there's a very low chance I'm going to be drafting Bailey Ober because he likes him more than I do. But
I actually haven't been getting him that much, as we covered on the players we love.
Yeah, it's not really that I don't like Bailey Ober. It's just he's not a target for me. I think I have one. I think Max Fried is just super undervalued. I don't know.
Agreed.
Like, I don't really know what the concern is that we're dropping him like a decent amount. What was his ADP last year? If Frank, if you could look that up while I'm filibustering.
I can tell you right now, it was 53.2.
Yeah, and like
pushed out.
Okay, his ERA was higher, but the underlying stats, like,
I don't think it's anything to do with the talent. I think it's just the forearm. Like, is his arm going to hold up?
Right,
here's
but,
the thing.
But remember, 2024, he was coming off a season where he only made 14 starts.
Yeah.
And he makes 29 starts last year. And he's really good, and he drops 30 spots in ADP.
The biggest difference for me, because I was pretty concerned about Max Fried heading into the offseason. Remember my bold predictions article that came out in September said he was going to have trouble finding a free agent deal to his liking because of something that turns up on his physical. Well, the Yankees offered him the biggest free agent contract for any left-handed pitcher in history. And he passed his physical. You got to think with the stakes attached to that contract, they ran him through a gamut of tests, and they came back clean. And so, like, if you were ever worried about a pitcher harboring an injury that just hasn't been discovered yet, free agency is going to clear that up. And so that answered the health question for me with Fried. And now I'm totally on board. I find he is the high-end pitcher if we're still considering these high-end pitchers. He's the one I'm drafting the most just because, I don't know, everybody seems like more of a skeptic than I am.
And there was a stretch last year, if I'm remembering correctly, where the strikeout rate kind of disappeared. Was it early on? He just wasn't getting very many strikeouts. Yeah, that's what it was. It was well below a strikeout per inning in April and May. He pretty much got that back from June on. He was at least a strikeout per inning, probably a little more over the course of those 4 months. So I just don't have that many concerns. It's a little bit of a park downgrade, but not as big as one as you'd think. Obviously, it's still a good supporting cast with the Yankees. I think he's a good bet for a low 3s ERA and not huge innings totals. Like, he's only gotten to 180 once in his career, but he got to 175 last year. And he's been at 165 2 other years. He's really only had 1 year where he's missed more than 5 starts. So I think Fried's a terrific value. I rank him about 20 spots higher than his ADP.
You guys know I was all in on Logan Webb last year. So I got burned. The whip was really high. And obviously providing that whip over that many innings is actually pretty detrimental. But I'm pretty intrigued by this cutter thing, man. Like, it was a good pitch in September for him. He acknowledged that his changeup was off all of last year. And he said, look, if I throw this cutter and it's a pitch that's coming into lefties, maybe that can kind of help my changeup get back on track. So he acknowledged it. He changed something and it worked. And he pitches in a great ballpark, obviously, in San Francisco. So I don't know. I'm kind of talking myself back into Logan Webb, where you're getting a pretty good discount on him year over year as well. So
yeah. I mean, good left side infield defense too.
Yeah, the Adames coming in.
I understand what you're saying about the whip. I think a 1.23 whip for Webb is just within the normal range of outcomes. You look at his hits per 9 rate from year to year. You look at his walks per 9 rate from year to year. He gave up a few more hits last year than usual, and the walk rate wasn't among his lowest. So it added up to a higher whip, but it wasn't like I break it down and I don't see like a pitcher with real red flags here. I think Logan Webb just had a lower percentile Logan Webb outcome, and he was still a must-start pitcher. I don't really have a lot of great concerns here.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement. Yeah, I can find myself jumping back in here on Logan Webb at the discounted price. Let's take our final break, and when we return, we'll jump back into starting pitcher ADP right after this.
The clock never stops. Relive the greatest moments with uninterrupted highlights and more.
It's Gareth Bale! Oh, wonderful goal!
On the UEFA Champions League channel. Streaming free.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball Today. It's our starting pitcher preview part 2. We are breaking down the top 40 in ADP. And after Logan Webb, we get to Hunter Greene, who has an ADP of 90.3, Spencer Schwellenbach with an ADP of 93.8, and Tyler Glasnow, ADP of 94.8. These are SP 25 through 27 in the average draft position. Hunter Greene, he just had his breakout season. The next step is now to do it over more innings. He introduced a new splitter that was pretty good for him. He didn't throw it all that much, but still a pretty good pitch. He also did a much better job suppressing hard contact. Health remains a major question. A sore right elbow last year for Greene. He also has a history of shoulder problems. Spencer Schwellenbach burst onto the scene for the Braves, got off to a rough start, but his final 15 outings, a 2.54 ERA, .96 whip, over a strikeout per inning. He throws 6 different pitches. He averages 96 miles per hour on the fastball. Great control. Only concern here is a big innings jump year over year from the minors up to the majors. And Tyler Glasnow, he pitched really well in his first season in LA. They really treated him as a workhorse as well. 6+ innings in 16 of 22 starts. But then the inevitable happened. He went on the IL with lower back tightness in July, and then again in August with right elbow tendonitis. He did not return for the postseason. Talented pitcher, but has yet to throw more than 135 innings in a regular season. Scott, you are up. Do you find yourself drafting any of Hunter Greene, Spencer Schwellenbach, and Tyler Glasnow?
I haven't yet. I'd be okay with it. I think maybe Greene is the most concerning, just because though the results were a lot better, it doesn't look like the process changed that much for him. He still gives up really hard contact in a place that's scary for that. And I just don't know that unless I've already built up I don't know. I don't really want to pay the price for him, I guess. Glasnow, I feel like maybe is being downgraded unfairly here. It is true that he had an elbow issue at the end of last season, but multiple reports have come out since then saying the MRI is clean, he feels good, yada, yada. I think it's, of course, goes without saying that part of the Tyler Glasnow experience is he's going to get hurt at some point, and you can only expect 120, 130 innings, but they'll be really high impact innings. And I think we're deep enough into the draft now where you can live with that. You can live with that trade-off. So I've come really close to drafting Glasnow before just because he's sliding, and he's probably the one I'm most likely to draft here. I do like Schwellenbach a lot. I just wish everybody else didn't, because they're not.
No, Scott, you don't have to like him. You could just leave him for me. You don't have to like him. It's totally fine.
What range are we at pitcher?
So this is, I believe, 25 through 27.
Okay, yeah. So these guys are all in the outside my top 30. And it's not a knock on any of them, because like I said, I don't think there's that much difference between 15 and 40 or whatever it is. But I'm just less likely to draft this group. And specifically, Hunter Greene is really hard to make sense of. And we've talked a lot about it because his strikeout rate went down last year, and his walk rate was basically identical. And yet his ERA improved by more than 2 runs, and his xERA improved by more than 3/4 of a run. So it wasn't just ERA fluctuation. He limited hard contact better than he ever has. He went from consistently below average contact allowed, or below average contact suppression, to some of the best in baseball. It was like him and Justin Steele, I think, had the best expected WOBA on contact last year. And Steele does that. And Hunter Greene has not for more than 1 year. And pitchers have some control over it, but it's really not very sticky from year to year. And I think maybe it might be a command thing, although when you look at Hunter Greene's pitch locations, they're very similar to the previous year with the fastball and slider. So I don't really know. My best guess at an explanation is that before this year, it was all the 4-seamer and the slider. It was up in the zone and then out of the zone. And maybe adding that splitter that has a similar movement profile, east-west to the fastball, but dives down. Maybe that just helped him avoid barrels. And maybe, the curveball, he only threw the splitter and curveball about 10% of the time total, and the splitter was only about 8%. But maybe just the presence of those kept hitters off the barrel of kept the ball off the barrel of bat. That's the best explanation I can come up with. I hope my tone is getting across that I don't really buy it, or at least I need to see more evidence before I buy it at price. And given the history of elbow and shoulder issues here at the major league level, given how hard he throws, it just doesn't feel like a bet I want to make this year. He's ranked very close to where I had him ranked last year, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the changer. Like, I was willing to give Hunter Greene the benefit of the doubt coming into the offseason. He had a 109 ERA over his final 10 starts with much better control than we've seen from him before. And if control's not going to be an issue for Hunter Greene anymore, then I could see this all working out. But when you add those lingering performance questions to the injury history, it's like, well, if I'm not even sure he's going to give me more than 120 innings or so, I just don't know that I want to deal with it. I do want to get back to Schwellenbach a little because he's a fun pitcher to talk about.
Let's talk about him, Scott. Do it.
So the reason there's so much excitement for Schwellenbach is because he was a rookie last year. Obviously, it's not like he was he was a good prospect. He wasn't like a much hyped prospect, you know. So he kind of came by surprise in fantasy, and part of the reason for that is he was drafted after being a two-way player in college, a reliever in college. So this was only his second professional season. I don't think anybody expected him to even reach the majors at any point, but he did. And he looked like somebody who's been pitching for a lot longer than he actually has, because he had a 6-pitch arsenal. He seemed comfortable varying the use of those pitches from start to start, giving hitters different looks. And his control was elite. It was like George Kirby level strike throwing, which also, like, he's like this pitching prodigy because he's doing things you'd expect a 15-year vet to do, but he did it in his second professional season of pitching after a not so extensive college career of pitching. Final 12 starts, Spencer Schwellenbach had a 2.47 ERA, 0.96 WHIP, 9.6 K per nine, and his strikeout rate kind of dropped during that time. It seemed like he was a little more contact focused. So there might even be more strikeout upside there than what I just shared with you. So I can understand the enthusiasm, but just as a general rule, everything I laid out there wasn't a much ballyhooed prospect. Caught everybody by surprise last year. Wasn't expected to be up. Hasn't been pitching for long. Like, we don't know how durable this all is. I'm not talking about a health sense how durable it is, but yes, also.
Although, that also.
Yeah. So I just think, for prudence sake, drafting Schwellenbach as your number 2 pitcher, or maybe he's going as like a high 3, right?
Yeah.
It just seems a little too much too fast. And so I wish he was going outside the top 30 rather than 26?
Yeah, I think he's 26th.
Yeah, it's a slight difference, but it's enough that I haven't had occasion to draft him yet, even though I would relish the opportunity.
All right. Well, I respect it, Scott. He is part of my pitching plan. I want Spencer Schwellenbach as my SP3 in any and every draft that I do this offseason. So I will be trying my best to accomplish that. Let's drop down to Tanner Bibee, who is next up with an ADP of 95.5, Freddie Peralta at 97.8, and Roki Sasaki 101.8. And these are SP 28 through 30 in the rankings. And Tanner Bibee, through 56 career starts, a 3.25 ERA, a 1.14 WHIP, feels kind of Max Fried-ish, where he's settling into this rock-solid SP2. He did end the season on the IL with right hip inflammation. Peralta's skills took a little bit of a step back from 2023. The strikeouts went down, the walks went up. He gives up a good amount of barrels, which unfortunately leads to home runs. I think expecting a high 3s ERA, 1.15 to 1.20 WHIP, 200 strikeouts is pretty fair from Freddie Peralta. And Sasaki, a 23-year-old stud pitcher who came over from Japan, signed with the Dodgers. At his best, he throws 100 miles per hour with a wipeout splitter, but comes with questions. Again, he's 23. He hasn't thrown more than 130 innings any season in Japan, and he had some arm troubles last year. As a result, the velocity came down. So big questions here. Chris, What about this group? Feels like you didn't really like the previous group too much. What about Tanner Bibee, Freddie Peralta, and Roki Sasaki?
I don't think I'm going to draft any of these guys very often either. I think Freddie Peralta's.
This is the dead zone, right, Chris? Is this the dead zone?
Well, yeah, and I think it's just that, again, there's just not much difference between these guys and the guys going behind them. And so once you hit that point, it's better to just wait. And so I think we can sum up Freddie Peralta very quickly, and we don't need to spend much time on him. Do you wish Blake Snell was cheaper but also worse? Freddie Peralta. Like, he's just
worse does a lot of lift, has a heavy load there.
Maddeningly inconsistent, but like at the end of the season, the numbers are usually pretty useful, and he's going to strike out a bunch of batters, and he's had a couple of injury scares, but he's gotten through them. And I think Freddie Peralta's fine, but you know, we kind of know what he is. Tanner Bibee, I don't know if we know what he is, but I kind of feel like there's not that much growth left. I think a lot of it comes down to whether he can get the changeup whiff rate back to where it was in 2023. That pitch was really, really effective for him, but the fastball is just okay. The cutter's very good, and I don't know what tweaks there are left to the arsenal to take a step forward. So I feel like Bibee is a solid SP2, SP3, but not someone I'm necessarily super excited about. And then there's Roki Sasaki, who it really kind of depends on where you're drafting, because here it says the ADP is around 100th overall. And okay, that's fine enough. But since January 1st at NFBC, it's 86.6. And that is a little tougher to swallow. He's my number 110 overall player. He's my number 33 SP. He's just in this. I've got this block from Hunter Greene, Jack Flaherty, Tyler Glasnow, Roki Sasaki, Spencer Strider, where you can kind of see the trend there. You can see what I'm going for. They're all potential aces when they're on the mound. I just don't know how much they're going to be on the mound. And so that's where I decided to stick all of them. And Sasaki, velocity has been down 2 miles per hour over the past couple of seasons. He's made 33 starts over the past couple of seasons. We know the Dodgers are going to be in a 6-man rotation, so the volume's not going to be there. I expect him to be a very, very good fantasy pitcher at some point, and it might be this year. It's not a guarantee that it's this year, and if you're drafting him inside of the top 100, you kind of need a guarantee. Not that he's good, but that he throws like 130 to 140 truly special innings. And he's capable of it, but it's got to be fastball sitting 98, not fastball sitting 96. That's a big difference, given that it doesn't have ideal shape or ideal movement. And so I will not be drafting Roki Sasaki. I'm so excited to watch him pitch. It looks like he's going to start the second game of the year, and they're going to go with Yamamoto and Sasaki to open the season in Japan, which that's amazing. That's so much fun.
Them is Imanaga. So
that's going to be phenomenal. I can't wait to watch that. I get up at 5 a.m. on March 22nd to watch it.
We could just stay up.
Maybe just stay up.
We'll
yeah,
probably finish the podcast around then, right?
So yeah, I think he could be really good. I think he could be, I don't know, like Kevin Gausman, like the good Kevin Gausman years. If you get that, but for 120 innings this year, that's probably not worth a top 100 pick, right?
And if you're taking Sasaki at this point, around 100, maybe he's your SP3.
It's got to be your SP3, I think.
I think you have to have a pretty strong innings base before you take Roki Sasaki, whether that's a Valdez,
Wheeler, Corbin Burns,
Jack Wheeler, like Logan Gilbert, one of those, at least one of those up top. But you might even want two.
And that's...
You probably don't want to pair him with like Tyler Glasnow or something like that.
And look, we're just focusing on the Roto context here. Head-to-head points.
I think all three of these guys are worse in points leagues.
I'm not sure Roki Sasaki is like a top 50 pitcher in a head-to-head points league, given the likely workload limitations that he's going to have.
Yeah. Yeah. So to put a finer point on some of these points that you've made, Roki Sasaki, is probably the best splitter in the world, and maybe that pitch is enough to sustain him, but he needs work on the rest of his arsenal. the 2 mile per hour loss in fastball velocity last year took his swinging strike rate, or his whiff rate, I should say, on that pitch, on the fastball. It took it from Chris Sale level to Chris Flexen level.
Yeah.
So we're talking a very fine line that he needs max velocity on his fastball for that to be a plus pitch for him.
It's kind of like Jesus Luzardo in that way.
And, maybe the splitter's so good that it doesn't matter. Maybe the Dodgers bring his slider further along. I know Sasaki made some strides with that last year, so that he doesn't really need to have a great fastball. But there are development issues. And the biggest thing is because he signed with the Dodgers, what I said for Yoshinobu Yamamoto applies also to Roki Sasaki, probably even more so given his youth and injury history, is that they don't need him to throw a single pitch. And I think this is going to be more of a development year. I understand he's going to be in the starting rotation to begin the year, but I think he'll be removed from the starting rotation frequently, whether for health reasons or otherwise. He'll have short starts. I just think it'll be a really frustrating year to roster him in fantasy. For as talented as he is, he's my top ranked prospect this year. Like a great dynasty option, Roki Sasaki, but the discount would have to be pretty steep for me to take him in a redraft league. And I don't see that happening given the hype.
It's going to be really tough though.
What?
Once he's out there and we're watching him and he's going every 6th or 7th day in April, and he could just come out and strike out 9 in his major league debut, right? Like it's going to be tough to be consistent on this.
But I don't know that that's even what I'm expecting. Yeah, that could be particularly the fastball velocity is back up.
Mm-hmm.
And still your point applies in that case. I still think there's going to be a major workload issue, but if that fastball isn't back up, he might struggle to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he'll be bad, but he might just be above average.
Yeah.
Until he gets that sorted out. One last point on Freddie Peralta. What worse Blake Snell looks like is an extra run in ERA over the last 3 years, basically. Yeah. So that's the difference when you set a worse version of Blake Snell.
And a reminder that all three of these, Bibee, Peralta, Sasaki, worse in a points league. Bibee only went 6+ innings in 13 of 31 starts last year. Peralta, it was just 12 of 32. So you're not going to get many quality starts from those guys this upcoming season. Maybe Bibee just takes another step and he becomes more of a workhorse, but so far in his career, that has not happened. After Sasaki, we have Zach Gallen with an ADP of 104.5, Grayson Rodriguez, also 104.5, and Hunter Brown at 107.5, SP 31 through 33. And Gallen had a weird year. Walks went way up. Led to a 126 whip. He dealt with a hamstring injury early on. Maybe that affected him for part of the season. He did figure something out in September when he had a 2.67 ERA, 104 whip, and 12.7 K per 9. Again, that's Zach Gallen, former top pitching prospect in Grayson Rodriguez, who is still searching. He was okay last season, but we need more. And I think he wants to give us more. He gets a good amount of whiffs, keeps tinkering with the pitch mix. On top of everything, he went on the IL twice last season with shoulder problems. And then we have Hunter Brown, whose season got off to an awful start and then flipped on a dime. His final 22 starts, a 2.31 ERA, 109 whip, over a strikeout per inning. And during that time, he changed the pitch mix, more cutters, more sinkers. 26 years old. He's entering his prime. He's on a great Astros team. So I could see there being some excitement for someone like Hunter Brown. Scott, what do you think? Excited about Hunter Brown, Grayson Rodriguez, or Zach Gallen?
I would draft any of them at cost tier. I don't know that that's the thing. 15 to 50, I'm having a hard time ranking them. Am I going to pick out individual ones to be excited about? I'm trying not to. If I need whip help, these are probably not the 3 to draft. So I'll put that out there. But if I'm doing okay in whip, they're fine. And yeah, I would say that if you are looking for untapped potential, Grayson Rodriguez stands out among the 3 of them. It is kind of a head scratcher why he hasn't been better. He's been okay, but The swinging strike rate, 13.6% last year. He has several pitches capable of generating whiffs. He walks aren't a major issue for him. Home runs aren't a major issue for him. It seems like he should be better than he is, and I think it's just the finer points of pitching that he needs to smooth out, like pitch selection and other things. So if he took a leap this year, it wouldn't surprise me. I'm kind of ranking him expecting a leap, and so you have to pay for that upside, I feel like. As for Gallen and Brown, Gallen is in the same category as that fivesome I mentioned earlier, Aaron Nola, Pablo Lopez, Max Fried, in that for most of his career, we've regarded him as an ace in fantasy. He is going significantly later than them, and I rank him significantly lower than them. And I think part of that is because I worry about his health. He's had he has a UCL sprain in his past and had forearm issues last year, and things were just kind of looking weird, as you pointed out, when he came back from that, with the swinging strike rate being just plain bad and the walk rate being just plain bad. And he did kind of turn things around, but he's
found it again. Yeah.
He's in a precarious spot here, I think, in terms of health, where I don't totally trust it. And so I think that's part of it, why he ranks below them. But part of it is I think maybe we mislabeled him in the first place as an ace caliber pitcher, when really it was just 2022 when he had a full season where he looked like an ace. And 2021 was pretty bad. 2023 was just, it was good in like an Aaron Nola sort of way.
I mean, it's Aaron Nola. Right?
I think the best scenario is Aaron Nola for Gallen.
Because he had the forearm strain in 2021, right? And that I feel like sticks in our heads. But last year it was just a hamstring issue that he missed time with. So he hasn't had an arm injury in 3 years now, or four within the last 3 years. He found it again last year. It's more of a command profile than a stuff profile. He's never going to look good by the stuff metrics. But I don't know, man. It feels like a pretty good bet for a mid-3s ERA and 200-ish strikeouts, right? Like he feels like a pretty solid bet to get to that 185 innings. He got 192 strikeouts and 220 in consecutive years. Last year, if not for the hamstring, he probably gets there again. So yeah, I like Gallen. I think he's pretty good.
Except
he's not great.
Like I said, the swinging strike rate is just plain bad. So I have concerns that the strikeouts are going to go away.
It's always been
it's always been like Zach Greinke. Like obviously that is a lofty comparison, but Zach Greinke never had huge swinging strike rates.
It was a 10% swinging strike rate. So it was like, it wasn't just not huge, it was bad.
But was that
very Mitch Kellery.
Was that significantly worse than it had been?
I think he's usually up over 11, right?
Okay. That I don't know. His season was weird. He had a stretch where he couldn't get any strikeouts or swings and misses. He had a stretch where he was walking a ton of batters, but the fact that he got it all back.
You're right about the swinging strike rate. It's usually he had 1 year where it was over 11.
10.8% for his career. 10.6 last.
Like that's just. So I think that's just who he is. It's
but then there's the walks. Where did the walks come from? Because the walks brought about a 1.26 WHIP.
Wasn't that right? Mostly after the return from the injury.
Even in September when he was really good, his walks were still high.
Yeah,
and we've seen stretches like that from him before, particularly when he first came up to the majors. I don't know. It's just. I'm fine with him where he's going, but I'm explaining why Gallen is not getting the same benefit of the doubt that like a Logan Webb is getting,
Chris, do you have any interest in Hunter Brown? I feel like we haven't talked much about him.
I am struggling with Hunter Brown because he's giving me. Sorry, I'm very fuzzy on the video right now. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to try to fix that while talking. It didn't work. Hunter Brown is giving me some Mitch Keller vibes, and I don't quite understand why. And maybe I'm just not being fair to Hunter Brown because the swinging strike rate was a lot better, but like he doesn't have the one killer put away pitch. It's weirdly a pitch to contact profile that got a lot of strikeouts over that stretch last year, but it was really like early on in the stretch, May and June, he got a lot of strikeouts. July and August, it was maybe a strikeout per inning, maybe a little lower. And so it all feels like the 3.50 ERA is probably what I expect and not the 2.50 ERA, which maybe that goes without saying, but I think people might look at the 2.50 ERA stretch and say, he can keep that up. And I don't know if I expect that. I think it's a good pitcher. I don't think Hunter Brown's an ace. I'm more excited about Grayson Rodriguez. I think Grayson Rodriguez, like Scott said, it all feels like it should be better. It feels like it's just a tweak here or there from really taking off. He's 25 years old. He's got good command. He's got great stuff still. I would like to see him go away from the slider that he used last year and back to the sweeper, which was a just significantly better pitch. And I don't really understand why he went away from it. Had his best results on balls in play as a rookie, had his best swinging strike rate as a rookie. It was a great pitch. And I don't really understand why he went away from it in favor of a harder like slider / cutter. And that might be it. That might be the path to unlocking it, is just that strikeout rate takes another step forward to 28, 29% if he gets more whiffs with a breaking ball. And all of a sudden we're talking about one of the best pitchers in baseball. If I'm going to make the bet on someone in this range, I'd rather do it on Grayson Rodriguez than anyone else.
You know, Chris, I want to be in on Grayson Rodriguez as well, but is it hypocritical to want to be in on him, but also being out on Hunter Greene? Because I get that they're different profiles, but Hunter Greene just had the much better season. They were both highly regarded prospects. Grayson Rodriguez was higher, but Hunter Greene just did what we want Grayson Rodriguez to do, and we're downplaying him. And they're both coming back from injuries too. So it's like, I don't know. Is that hypocritical?
Well, I guess the dismissive way to put it is history didn't start in 2024. Grayson Rodriguez was viewed as the much better player every year before 2024. And his results in 2023, not great, better than Hunter Greene's. And I think the injury history is less concerning because it's a shoulder injury. It was a lat injury. He went on the IL in April for about 20 days with shoulder inflammation. Last year it was the lat, which that's happened twice now. He had the lat injury his final year in the minors. Now it happened there, but that to me doesn't feel like, it's not a labrum, you know, it's not
like a rotator cuff, right?
Yeah, a rotator cuff or you know, certainly not an elbow. And so I'm just a little less concerned about the injury risk with Grayson Rodriguez than I am with Hunter Greene, who's had Tommy John surgery, has had, I believe it was a labrum injury and a UCL sprain. So I'm just a little more optimistic about Grayson Rodriguez figuring it out. And also, you know, 2 rounds cheaper?
And the ballpark too. I think that
much
helps as well.
Better ballpark, although will be worse than it was last year. You have to factor that in. We can't be excited for Jordan Westburg and not factor it in for the Orioles pitchers. It will be a slightly worse environment, but not a bad one.
Even if it's an average ballpark, it's still a much better pitching environment.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Especially because Hunter Greene is a fly ball pitcher.
Yeah. All right. After Hunter Brown, we have Sonny Gray with an ADP of 109.5, Joe Ryan at 111, and Shane McClanahan.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money.
Here we go.
Here comes the money.
With an ADP of 123.3, these are SP 34 through 36. Sonny Gray followed up his top 2 Cy Young finish in 2023 with even more skill improvement last year. Among qualified starting pitchers, Sonny Gray ranked 2nd in K per 9, 3rd in K minus walk rate, 7th in FIP, 2nd in XFIP, 3rd in Sierra, and 9th in swinging strike rate. He's also 35 years old, and his season ended with right forearm flexor tendonitis. I was down on Joe Ryan entering last season. He took a big step forward. He lowered the fastball usage. He mixed in some more sweepers. It was a really dominant pitch for him. The fastball velocity also jumped up 2 miles per hour. Perhaps that contributed to his season-ending shoulder strain. Again, that was Joe Ryan. And last on this list was Shane McClanahan, who's returning from his second Tommy John surgery and will be limited to around 150 innings this season. Last time we saw him was 2023, where he was having a strong season on the surface. The underlying numbers didn't necessarily buy it. Also, pitching outdoors now in George Steinbrenner Field should be a better hitting environment. So some questions here with Shane McClanahan. Scott, go back to you here. Sonny Gray, Joe Ryan, and Shane O'Mac. What do you think?
Sonny Gray has long been the bane of my existence as an evaluator because it seems like he's never the same guy 2 years in a row. And these past 2 years were no exception. That being said, it looks like he actually got better last year from a skills standpoint, and yet he's being lesser regarded in fantasy. So I find myself drafting him quite a bit, not because I think his upside is sky high, but just because I think he's one of those pitchers in that 15 to 50 range who lasts longer than he should. And whoever that ends up being in a particular draft, that's who I'm taking. He was one of the more obvious pitchers by the ERA estimators who, how should I say it? His 3.84 ERA was far above basically all of the ERA estimators. It was a 3.12 FIP, 2.82 xFIP, 3.03 Sierra.
But
expected ERA was high.
Expected ERA. That was the one that wasn't. Yeah.
That's the funny thing about him is you say he's been a different pitcher. The xERA the last 3 seasons, 367, 366, 367.
Well,
which even if we get
look at all the other stats.
Oh yeah, no, I'll take it.
5 ERA with like 10K per nine. That's it's really good.
I mean, just reading K per 9 the last 5 years, 11, 9, 8.8, 10.3, 11 points. Like even that's all over the place. Yeah, I like the value of Sonny Gray. I think he's fine where he's going. Joe Ryan, I like the value, especially since he's a whip specialist. And this kind of drives home the point about the splitting hairs aspect of this very large range of the rankings. I rank Bailey Ober 20. I'm not on starting pitcher. I rank him 23rd at starting pitcher, I believe. And I rank 25th. I rank Bailey Ober 25th, and I rank Joe Ryan 36th, 11 spots apart in my starting pitcher rankings. I'm not sure they're that different. They have the same strengths and weaknesses. It's just extents. It's just a matter of extents. I think Joe Ryan has a little more meltdown potential, but I think he has more strikeout upside too. So that comes out to 11 spots different in the rankings. If I'm struggling with whip at this point in the draft, I am zeroing in on Joe Ryan because that is one thing you could count on him for. He gets a lot of outs on contact with the high fly ball rate. He has terrific control. The whip's going to be low. The ERA might be over 4, or it might not. It might be 3.40. You know, that's the danger in drafting a fly ball pitcher. That's the difference between Bailey Ober and Shota Imanaga last year. That's Joe Ryan's range of outcomes. So I think he's good at the price here. And like I said, if I need whip help, I'm taking him. Probably the one you're most eager to hear about, dear listener, is the one I haven't addressed yet, which is Shane McClanahan.
Well, Sleepers, Breakouts, and Busts are coming up later in the show, and I will be talking about Shane McClanahan there.
All right. I'll just save it for that then.
All right. Do you guys worry at all about Joe Ryan's velocity being up and then his season ending with a shoulder strain? Because to me, it feels like those things might be correlated.
I don't know. It could be. It was a teres major strain, which is, I think, less concerning than like a capsule or a labrum or a rotator cuff, whatever. But I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I have no idea. I think he's really good, and I think the discount is appropriate given the injury risk. Like, I think the skill set is basically identical to Bryce Miller or Bailey Ober or Shota Imanaga. and you're getting him at a 20, 30 pick discount to those guys, he hurt his shoulder last year. So that should happen.
I also think we're at a point now in the pitcher rankings where durability concerns just come with the territory.
Yeah.
Like either you're getting a boring workhorse, like that's the main thing you're drafting him for, is he's going to log a lot of innings, or you're just accepting some injury risk to get something more exciting. So I don't really factor that in, the shoulder thing for Joe Ryan.
I thought about doing a bit for my SP preview piece where I just copy and pasted ... if he stays healthy at the end of every single player I wrote about, because it's just pitchers also. And so, yeah, Joe Ryan's injury risk is probably higher than Bailey Ober's. It's a 30% chance of going on the IL in any given season versus a 40% chance probably,
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we are down to our last trio for today, and after McClanahan, we get down to Justin Steele with an ADP of 125.5, Spencer Strider at 128, and Carlos Rodon at 132.3. These are SP 37 through 39, and Steele, the past 3 seasons, it's a 3.10 ERA, a 120 WHIP. That WHIP has been better the past 2 years. Over a strikeout per inning. He dealt with injuries last year. He strained his left hamstring on opening day. He missed a month, and then left elbow tendonitis in September. He missed only 2 weeks. He did return, made a couple more starts with the Cubs at the end of the season. Spencer Strider, the SP1 in ADP last season. He was coming off a 20-win season with 281 strikeouts in 2023. Now he's returning from internal brace surgery, and we just don't have much data on starting pitchers returning from this injury. The hope is that Strider will be back in late April, but we're not exactly sure if he will be the same pitcher as he was before. And then Carlos Rodon stayed healthy. He made 32 starts. It's actually, it's great. Probably was not expecting that. Won 16 games with a bunch of strikeouts, 195 of them, and a bunch of home runs allowed as well. 31 homers for Rodon. He did take a step forward in the second half. A 291 ERA, a 113 WHIP, 11 K per 9. Chris, I know you like Carlos Rodon. Talk to me about Carlos Rodon.
I think there's still top 20 pitcher upside here. And I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but he, to his credit, experimented in expanding his pitch selection last year, and it didn't go well. The cutter specifically was kind of a disaster for him, and he stopped throwing it at the end of June. And from that point on, he had a 3.43 ERA, 103 strikeouts in his final 81 and a third innings of work. I think home runs are probably going to be an issue. I think the WHIP is probably going to be slightly more than helpful at best, but probably not very good. But lots of strikeouts, good win potential. I think there is a lot to like about Carlos Rodon and what he showed in the second half last year, getting that slider and fastball combo back. The changeup actually looked really good. I think it was like a 39% whiff rate on the changeup, if I'm remembering correctly. Very good results on play. And even the curveball was like a useful early count strike stealer for him in a way that I think he needs to avoid being predictable. So he's not the guy he was in San Francisco. I don't think that's ever coming back, but there's going to be a bunch of 9 and 10 strikeout starts in there. There's going to be some 2 or 3 homer-ish starts that are frustrating, but on the whole, I'm not sure there's that much of a difference between him and some of those other guys we've talked about, like Tanner Bibee, who probably has less strikeout upside, won't have a great whip. I think they're pretty similar pitchers. So I think Rodon's a nice value here.
That changeup, 188 batting average against, 49.5% whiff rate.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome. The one thing that scares me and kind of baffles me about Rodon is that since he has joined the Yankees, his fastball just gets destroyed.
Yeah.
It was such a good pitch for him prior to that. And the past two, last season, 93 average exit velocity against his fastball. That pitch gets crushed.
The weird thing is the physical characteristics of the pitch haven't really changed. The velocity is almost identical. It was 95.4 miles per hour in 2021. It was 95.5 in 2022. Last year was 95.4. The vertical movement, very similar. The horizontal movement, very similar. It's weird
Yeah.
that he hasn't been as good with the four seamer. I don't know if it's a predictability thing. I don't know if the arm slot has changed enough that it's just made it a little less effective, but that is weird. I don't have a good explanation for it, but that is why the development of the changeup, the fact that he can throw the curveball early in counts is helpful, because he had to rely so heavily. It was just the four seamer and the slider, and he was putting guys away with both of those pitches. He's not going to be able to do that anymore.
I think the most concerning aspect about Carlos Rodon for me is that while Sonny Gray was one of the biggest underachievers by the ERA estimators, Carlos Rodon, despite having a 3.96 ERA, high obviously, was one of the biggest overachievers by the expected stats. xERA was 4.14, FIP was 4.39, xFIP was 4.09. Sierra, I presume, was similar,
378.
Oh, that was actually the best one. There's always that one, right? I think that's mostly because he was so home run prone, because obviously the K rate was good. The walk rate was better than usual for Carlos Rodon. But that's how home run prone he is that, like, unless something in the profile changes, maybe with some of those, maybe with the way he's mixing up his pitches now, it could. He's going to be an ERA liability. I feel pretty safe saying that.
How does this make you feel? 6.47 ERA in the first inning. And Frank, I know you know that.
Oh yeah,
because the experience, the Carlos Rodon experience, was pretty frustrating last year because he'd just get bombed in the first inning. And if he got through the first couple of innings unscathed, he was going to have a good start. 4.78 ERA in the second. After that, it's like 3.30 or lower in every inning, except the nine games where he pitched into the seventh. He gave up 6 earned runs in 3 2/3 innings. They probably just left him out a little long in those, and that's a limitation of his if he can't go more than 6 innings effectively. But it does feel like maybe just alter the game plan a little, mix in a couple curveballs in the first inning, a couple of changeups just to keep, because what it would be was like 80% fastballs in the first inning.
I want to say that I have recently moved Carlos Rodon behind Sean Manaea, because my concerns for Manaea, which exist, I think are actually less than for Rodon. So I'm kind of out on a limb with that one. I know it's against consensus, but I think I've positioned it so I will not be drafting Rodon just because I want Manaea more, and they'll probably go in a similar range. Rodon typically sooner. I want to pivot from him, though, because I think the other 2 pitchers here are more interesting. I'll begin with Justin Steele,
who you do have a history with.
I think, yeah, I have a history of being a Justin Steele downer back when everybody thought he was the NL Cy Young winner 2 years ago. But now I am singing the praises of Justin Steele because I think he's one of the most underdrafted pitchers, maybe the most underdrafted pitchers, in fact. He missed time with injury last year, and okay, maybe deserves to be downgraded some for that. It was typical stuff. Actually, I think it was, didn't he have a
hamstring early and then elbow tendonitis late.
Yeah, so it wasn't even all pitching related stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, it was actually fielding a ball, I believe, when he suffered the hamstring injury.
On opening day or something like that. Anyway, 2 years ago, when he was a Cy Young contender, Justin Steele had a 3.06 ERA, 117 whip, 9.1 K per 9. Last year, smaller workload because of the injury, 24 starts instead of 30. He had a 3.07 ERA, 110 whip, 9 K per 9. Virtually identical strike ERA, whip, and K per 9 rate in those 2 seasons. In one season, Steele is thought of as an ace, and this year he's not even a top 30 starting pitcher. That doesn't compute to me. I want to draft him everywhere because it's just such an obvious bargain. I think the main reason he slid so much just comes down to wins. 2 years ago, he won 53% of his starts. Last year, he won 21% of his starts, despite having basically the same numbers. And of course, that's just randomness. It's no reason to downgrade him. Yeah, I'm big into Steele.
And the Cubs should be much better this year too.
It's a steal. Steele is a steal.
I think part of it is also he's a lefty who throws 91.6 miles per hour with his four-seamer and throws his four-seamer and slider 90% of the time. And so I think people don't believe in it. Like think there's something fluky about his success.
Why did they believe in it less now than at this time of year?
Well, yeah, I can't explain, except for I guess the injury. But I think the four-seamer slider categories on Baseball Savant do Justin Steele a disservice because the four-seamer is kind of a cutter sometimes, and it's kind of a four-seamer other times. The slider is kind of a slider sometimes, kind of a cutter sometimes, kind of a curveball sometimes. Like it's two pitches, but he mixes speeds. He mixes movement really, really well with them in a way that it's effectively 4 or 5 pitches. And that is the nuances of his approach are not adequately captured in the way we classify pitches for good reason, because it works for most pitchers and it doesn't for Justin Steele. So I think that helps explain why he's frankly such a weird pitcher.
And then there's Spencer Strider, who I'm honoring today with my t-shirt choice. I had to shelve it for almost all of last season because it just made me sad. But I'm breaking it out again because Spencer Strider, look, there was video of him throwing today, clearly at lower effort, maybe 50% effort, but he was out there throwing off a mound, and all the reports have been positive so far. It seems like the Braves are aiming for late April for his return. Probably going to make at least one appearance this spring, I would think. And it's going to be a draft and stash situation, and that always makes people nervous. I think the influence of the NFBC on drafting habits in recent years can maybe cause a draft and stash to slide too far because there's just not a good way to stash players in NFBC. There's no IL spots. So I am finding that I like drafting Strider at this point. Obviously, there's a lot of risk, but it's worth it to me to get what was obviously the top pitcher in fantasy going into last season, like a distant number one in terms of strikeout potential, and just like the ace among aces a year ago. And now you can get him. We're outside the top. We're right at 30, right? Yeah, to me, that's worth it. But it's not just a matter of when he comes back. I do think it's a precarious profile because it's so much depends on Spencer Strider getting that max effort fastball, like with Roki Sasaki. I mean, it's a fastball with great secondary characteristics, but when we've seen it drop to 96 instead of 99, like happened against the Phillies,
Whoa.
Uh-oh.
Oh, I'm going to remove you for a second, Chris. Robo Scott at the end of the podcast.
Yeah. Like happened against the Phillies 2 years ago, I was saying. Remember, he got crushed and he didn't have his usual fastball velocity. And so that's like, I worry that if there's any loss of skill there with Strider, it could go poorly for him. That's worth bringing up.
Yeah. So look, you're getting him at a huge discount. Obviously, he's coming back from major surgery. Scott, if you do draft Spencer Strider, what are you looking to get him as? Your SP4? You need at least 3 pitchers before you take him, if you do?
I mean, I don't know that I necessarily shy away from him, regardless of how many pitchers I had, because if I only have 2 at that point, then I need to pursue upside.
Yeah,
too.
you're gonna keep taking them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I don't think it makes a difference. Ideally, it would probably be like my 4th pitcher, like you said, but I wouldn't necessarily shy away from him as my 3rd pitcher.
Is it more about who you already have? Like, if this is the league where you drafted Blake Snell, are you a little more worried about taking Strider?
I don't think so. I that's logical. I think it's mostly just a question of how deep the league is, like what the waiver wire looks like, what fallback options at starting pitcher are going to be. And the shallower the league, the more likely I am to take Strider for the higher impact and the more comfortable landing if it doesn't work out.
All right, well, I am making an executive decision because A, I don't want to rush through these, and B, I don't want this podcast to be like an hour and 45 minutes. So we will save sleepers, breakouts, and busts for starting pitcher preview part 3. Maybe we'll just lead off the podcast.
Well, wait. We have to make an executive decision then. We need to talk about Shane McClanahan now.
Oh.
We didn't talk about him earlier.
Yeah. We got a few minutes. We can do that.
All right, well, hit me. I assume you were going to talk about him as a bust, Chris.
Shane McClanahan was going to be my bust pick. I'll come up with a new one for tomorrow so we have some fresh content. But yeah, I'm really worried about Shane McClanahan. He's coming back from the second Tommy John surgery, and we haven't seen what he looks like coming back from that. So already, I think it's just a huge risk. It's possible he looks fine, and this sounds stupid come spring training, but right now we haven't seen Shane McClanahan pitch on a mound. But then there are other things that I'm worried about. One is the move away from Tropicana Field to George M. Steinbrenner Park, which Tropicana Field had Tropicana Field, right? Not Tropicana Park. Tropicana
Field,
there was something about it. I don't know if it's the fact that it's completely indoors. It's the only non-retractable roof stadium, so it's the only completely insulated environment. There's something about the airflow in the building. I don't know what it is, but pitches had higher stuff ratings at Tropicana than any other stadium in baseball. And so that inflated everyone on the Rays. It inflated opposing pitchers too. The data is clear on both ends. And Willie Adames talked about how much he struggled to see the ball there. I think there are probably other hitters who struggle there. It's weird lighting. It's just a weird place. If you've ever been there, it's a weird place to watch a baseball game. It doesn't feel right. There's like an uncanny valley aspect to watching a baseball game in Tampa, St. Petersburg. But then there's the fact that we talk about Shane McClanahan as if he had just been an ace from the moment he stepped on the baseball field. And it was a mid-3 ERA in his first season, a low mid-2 ERA in his second season, and a 3.29 before the injury in 2023. But it's a 27% strikeout rate in his first year, a 30% strikeout rate in his second, a 26% in the first year. The outlier in 2022 is also the walk rate, 7.2, 5.8, 8.7%. xERA, 457, 279, 410. The point is 2022 is the only season where everything that Shane McClanahan did looked like an ace. And then 2021 and 2023 looked like good pitchers, but not an ace. So you factor in likely just going to be pitching in a worse environment that's going to make his stuff play up worse, and it's probably going to just be a worse place to pitch overall. You factor in that he wasn't the ace he's often talked about all the way throughout his career. We had the one season. And then you have the second Tommy John surgery. It feels like there's a lot of ways for things to go wrong for Shane McClanahan. The command isn't there, and he gives up a lot of walks, or the strikeout rate is good but not elite, or just he gets hit harder because everybody on Tampa is going to get hit harder. So it's not a bet I want to make, even at the reduced price. We're talking about 120th overall. It's not enough of a discount.
Okay, I do have him ranked a little lower than. I think he's the 37th pitcher drafted on average.
Yeah.
But he doesn't need to be Cy Young contender Shane McClanahan to live up to this ADP, not even close. So, yes, I when talking to Nick Pollock, who I think has him as a top 12 pitcher, I bring up, but the strikeouts were down in 2023 and the walks were up, and maybe we shouldn't just presume he has ace upside still. But at 37th, I don't even know that that's a factor for me for Shane McClanahan. Whether he has maybe if he does, great, all the merrier. But I'm not needing ace production from him at that point.
What I'm talking about though is not just not getting ace production from him. I think there's a chance this goes Walker Buehler bad.
Well, yes, that's the reason I rank Shane McClanahan low. I'm just saying that's really the only reason is I don't. Like there have been some pretty high profile misses with second Tommy John surgeries in the past, with Walker Buehler being a recent example. And so I just want to play it extra safe. So he's going 37th among starting pitchers, Shane McClanahan. And
I've got him 45th.
Right. I have him 42nd. So I'm kind of halfway in between you and ADP. Somebody's always eager to draft him. Somebody is in Nick Pollock's camp, and look, Nick Pollock is as good of a pitcher evaluator as there is. So he may be totally right about that. But I just don't know. I don't think there's any way to account for that second Tommy John surgery variable. And given that this year's pitching class is so deep, there's not a lot of incentive to take that big of a risk. I will point out also Shane McClanahan is a good ground ball pitcher. So even though, it's not great even for ground ball pitchers that the Rays are going to a more hitter-friendly and what should be a very hitter-friendly stadium, I don't worry about the effect on McClanahan as much as I do for like Ryan Pepio and Taj Bradley. But I'll have more to say about that with them on a later show.
And that is where we will end it. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.